Hello, I'm Alfred.
And I'm Chris.
It is Thursday, and this is Why Wait Till Sunday. Probably a top 5 midweek college daily fantasy show. Well, here we are in week 4. I know it's kind of cliche, but it's really flying by, man. I can't believe when I was putting this stuff together and I was like putting week 4 on everything. It's like a month in.
I know we're almost there. We're almost halfway.
I mean, it takes
it feels
forever
like
to get here, and then it just flies by when it's actually here.
I know. We got three main slates we've been through, and then week 0 was we can call it an appetizer.
A little teaser. But we got, I think, and you can speak for yourself, but week 1 was rocky. Week 2 was not great for my personal lineups. Now, we don't actually give out full-blown lineups on the show, but we talk about what we like. Inevitably, those players wind up in our lineups. But week 3, I guess week 0, week 1 were bad. Week 2, and then last week, week 3, I was pretty good. In fact, week 3 was probably my best week. I was on fire with all my lineups almost. So I think we're getting the hang of it. Obviously, this isn't the first time we've played college DFS, but each season has its own rhythm and its own trends. And sometimes it takes a minute to figure things out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like we really nailed it the last 2 weeks in terms of kind of where to pay up, where to pay down. I think we've done really well with bargain values and being able to pay up for key players. So I think we've got a good understanding, like you said, where the college season is heading. And I mean, it's a different year. Like last year was a different year too. There's a lot of adjustments happening. So it's a different season, but I think we're getting the hang of this thing.
Yeah. So, of course I'm confident going in and, may play more than I have. And, that's always a recipe for having your worst week. But nevertheless, we're going to do the show. And we're going to talk about this week. Without further ado, we got week 4. That's Bijan out on the front of the screen there because he's so awesome. And I was really excited to highlight him because we get a nice Texas game. But first on the slate, Missouri Boston College. This game has probably a higher point total than you might think at 59. And both teams coming in near 30 total points on their team total. Missouri at 31 for 7th on the slate. Boston College at 28. Should be a close game. May go back and forth. I think it's interesting, and I know that you like the Missouri quarterback, who we'll get into a little bit later, but that's certainly an unusual game. Missouri going up to Boston College in a out of conference Power 5 matchup. That's just, you don't see that every day. I feel like it's been happening more and more often, though.
Yeah, I'm interested in this game just from a fan perspective too. I think it's going to be kind of exciting.
Absolutely. Okay. The cupcake game of the slate is Georgia at Vandy. Give us the details of that one. Yeah.
I wish it wasn't on the slate, to be honest. I mean, Georgia's the 34-point favorite with the highest implied team total at 42.5. Vandy's is all the way down there at 8.5, which pretty much just takes them totally out this week. It's not the most exciting game, but we got to talk about it. And I wish I was more excited about it. I mean, there were better options to include, but here we are.
Yeah, I'm not loving it. We also have probably a fantasy bonanza at LSU at Mississippi State. This game has a 56.5 total. But again, it's another one of these close matchups that the team totals both are right around 30, with LSU coming in right at 30 or so and Mississippi State at 26. But just looking at these teams in the seasons they've had, I think there's a pretty good chance there's some fantasy value there. And then we've got our cover boy here, Texas Tech at Texas. Give us the details there.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. Texas is favored by 9, but the the total is 60 and a half, which is interesting. It's fourth highest on the slate. I think this could be a really fun game. I think Texas can probably run the ball a little bit. I think they're going to have a little bit of trouble passing, but I think, Texas Tech is such an interesting team. Tyler Shuck has been, pretty solid this year, and they have a semblance of the run game. So I think that, I like Texas in this game, but I'm really excited again to watch this game and really see how it unfolds, because we've seen Texas struggle a little bit, and Texas Tech is, I think, probably outpaced expectations. So again, a really interesting game.
Yeah, Texas Tech's defense is actually better than you think, and they're not quite the air raid, put up 60 and win shootouts team that they used to be. Then we have SMU at TCU, which kind of promises to probably be one of the more fantasy friendly games on the entire slate. The total 63.5. Texas Christian projected to score almost 37 points. SMU comes in almost at 27 points with a 10-point spread. So should be plenty of touchdowns in this game. And, that's kind of one to definitely circle on the slate. And getting SMU on a main slate is a little bit interesting too. So probably some names that, we're going to have to familiarize ourselves with there. We have a classic Midwestern showdown. Notre Dame headed to Wisconsin. What do you got there?
Yeah, so Wisconsin's 5.5 point favorites, and I think it's actually gone up since I made the note of it. I think it's at 6 now across most books. But Notre Dame struggled a lot this year. They barely beat Toledo. They barely beat Florida State. They took care of Purdue, but Purdue didn't look very good. Wisconsin's defense is just rock solid. The total in this game is only 46.5, which is the second lowest on the slate. So it's not like we're inching and just trying to get players into our lineups from this game. But I do think from a real life perspective, again, an interesting game that there's probably a little bit of DFS value that we can capture here. So good game, not a priority target for us.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Boise State at Utah State. Now, a lot of people are familiar with Boise State at this point. They're no longer, this upstart G5 team. They're kind of a regular presence on big-time college football. But Utah State has been on some late slates, some short slates, and they have a very exciting offense with a new coach coming up from Arkansas State in the offseason, and they have been lighting it up. So if you're not familiar with Utah State, we are going to get you familiar with them, and I think that's going to be an important place to mine for fantasy points this week. We got a huge SEC showdown. Texas A&M goes to Fayetteville to take on surprisingly undefeated Arkansas, who just knocked off Texas a couple weeks ago or last week maybe. And tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, this is gonna again. I'm getting all the fun real life games, and you're getting all the exciting explosive fantasy offenses.
Bananas. I scheduled it like that.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't have any say in the graphics, so what you see on screen if you're on YouTube, all Alfred. But yeah, so again, a fun real life game. Texas A&M is probably if they're not a top 5 defense in the country, they're certainly top 10. Excellent defense. I think Arkansas has really impressed a lot of people this year. They just will run it all the time with KJ Jefferson and a mix of running backs. But, spread's 47.5. It's the 9th highest on the slate. So there's, I think, a little bit of value to be had here, but not one of the big games that we're targeting once again.
Sorry about that. And again, I get Louisville at Florida State. So if I'm talking, you probably want to listen more because I've got the fun games. Louisville at Florida State should be a bit of, both these defenses are not very good. Let me get the number here for us. But I know I'm going to be targeting some teams in this. Both teams are pretty bad. Both defenses are pretty bad. It's a 61.5 point total. Louisville coming in at 32 points, 6th on the slate, and Florida State at 30 points, 9th on the slate. Both of those teams would be top half of the slate. And so I think, that's a place to go as well. So it's kind of like there's games where both teams are exciting, and then there's games where neither team is exciting. And I might have another one for you, Chris. Clemson at North Carolina State, your home team in Raleigh.
Yeah, go Wolfpack. But This is once again a total a total under 48 points. We're looking at 46.5 here. It's the second lowest on the slate. Clemson's offense has honestly been horrible. Like that's putting it nicely. They just have not been good. Really, really underwhelming this year. DJU has not looked like himself. North Carolina State's been kind of impressive. They had a huge win week 1 against USF. They struggled a little bit on the road in Starkville last week, but this is probably going to be a defensive game more than anything. The best thing I could say is it's going to be an interesting real life game, right? Like we're looking at 46.5 total.
I mean, can NC State knock off Clemson?
Yes.
And then is Clemson, everyone's going to be waiting for them to get right. So if you guess on the get right game, you could probably make some money, but I don't know if this is it on the road at NC State. We'll have to find out.
I don't think so. NC State's got a good defense,
good.
And
yeah,
I think it's more likely that they cover than Clemson does, but that's a discussion for a different podcast.
That is a different podcast. Iowa State at Baylor. This one doesn't excite me that much either. Kind of a lowish point total, I think of 48. You've got some big names at least in Charlie Kohler, tight end for Iowa State, and Breece Hall, of course. Baylor, I have to admit, I don't know that much about, but I know Iowa State's defense is pretty good. And, just a hint at our other show, the 3 and Out, we'll talk about this more. But this game, so Iowa on the road and Baylor at home in the Big 12, when those teams are playing at home or on the road in the Big 12, the under is like way wins most of the time. And so I'll give those numbers a little bit later, but it looks like under is a decent bet here. I don't love this game for fantasy. And take us home with Rutgers at Michigan.
Ooh, this one's over 50, so this is a little more exciting. Yeah, so the spread here is, I think it's gone up to 20, and Rutgers starts, they started 3-0. They've had some really nice wins. They really took it to Temple. They beat Syracuse pretty well. But, Michigan, is this their year? They've really put a lot of stuff together that we wanted to see. Blake Corum's looked fantastic. I think that it's probably going to be a tough sledding game for Rutgers. Their implied team total is 23rd on the slate is 16.5 or 16.8. So, I don't know what this game looks like necessarily, but it's not my favorite to target for DFS purposes just because it's Michigan and it's Rutgers. And we've talked extensively about how we don't like playing players from Michigan.
Yes, that is a theme of the show. That takes us for the whole slate there. And it should be a good one. There's going to be some games that you just want to just pile it on, and then some stay away games. And so we can maybe narrow some of the players. Speaking of the players, let's get right into it here. Quarterbacks. You've got Tanner Mordecai sitting at number 1. He's 9K, which I think a lot of people might balk that actually. Like, who's Tanner Mordecai and why is he 9K? Is he worth it? Tell us. I mean, there may be some listeners that aren't super familiar with SMU. They haven't been on a slate yet.
Yeah, so Mordecai has been really outstanding to start the year. He's averaging 30 to 41 yards per game, 5.3 touchdowns per game. That equates to 39.77 DraftKings points per game. So he's been fantastic. And he gets a TCU team that is okay. They're allowing 9.87 yards per team pass attempt. They're not super impressive, even though, they're 9-point favorites. I think their defense leaves a little bit to be desired. And that just means a better game script for Mordecai to continue throwing. They've one of the country's highest pass rates at 52.3%. I like him this week, and I'm okay paying up for him because I think that you're going to want to stack him with other SMU options. So that's really the kicker there. That do you pay a little bit more for Mordecai to really get positive correlation on the rest of the slate?
Yeah, and I think I've been messing around already with some lineups, and I mean it seems hard. Like you said, 5 touchdowns per game. I mean, even if 3 is his floor, like you kind of don't have a choice there. But we're talking about the big guns like we always do. I think you have to at least address them. So then we go to Cunningham for Louisville. He had a big game against CF last week. He put 2 in on the ground, I think threw for 2 or something like that. So had a pretty big game. He's going to FSU at 8,800, I think. I mean, do you have an opinion? I kind of wasn't jazzed about starting him. I just feel like he's got a floor game in him that is not going to do anything.
Yeah, I do like Cunningham. I actually think if I'm not so I think stacking the SMU TCU game is probably going to be fairly popular this week. So if I am trying to get a little bit different on this slate, I will probably try to play Cunningham because he has been extremely impressive this year. He's averaging over 32 DraftKings points per game. The game should be close. It's a 2.5 point spread, but it's over 60 as the total. Florida State has not been particularly good in really any facet of the game on defense, but they do allow the 107th. They rank 107th in yards per pass attempt, which I think is interesting since Cunningham's calling card isn't really passing the ball. So that might open up the door to a higher ceiling game than I think that we might anticipate otherwise in this matchup. So I really do like Cunningham, but it's more so in the event that I'm not stacking Mordecai. And so that's the other way that I'm probably constructing lineups this week.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's an interesting point. FSU's pass defense is bad. Their run defense is certainly the strength, if anything. However, I don't think I count quarterback rushing. If a defense is good at stopping the run, I don't know. A rushing quarterback's just a different animal. The way that the offense runs is totally different. And scrambles, of course, have really nothing to do, I think, with traditional run defense. So, I think that's a good point. Maybe if his passing is unlocked and he still gets the ground points, that could be a ceiling game, potential there. Max Duggan, kind of a fantasy joke, I think, in a lot of ways. You're kind of like a fancy Adrian Martinez, where nobody really wants to watch him play, but at the end of the day, he does put up points for fantasy. He runs a lot. He'll get a lot of rushing touchdowns. But I think 8,700 feels a little strong for Duggan. What do you think about him in this shootout with SMU?
So in my article that's coming out tomorrow, where we only have a limited time here to talk about the slate, so it goes a little bit more in depth. But I think a legitimate way to play this slate is to stack the options with SMU and TCU, and that means playing Mordecai and Duggan. I think Duggan's really interesting. He has 12 games in his last 20 of 35 plus rushing yards, and he has 9 over 65 yards in his last 20. So basically half over 65 yards, 17 rushing touchdowns in his last 20 games. I mean, he's really, really solid on the ground. I think that he could be involved in all phases, despite them being a double-digit favorite in this matchup. I do think it's going to be high scoring. It's the over on the total's 63.5. Really, really interesting. He is basically the same price as the other options, within $300. So I think Duggan's in play, and I think the most interesting way to play him is definitely stacking the SMU game. I won't play him as a one-off. I will play him if I am investing heavily in that game. So it might be him and Quentin Johnston, and then run back with an SMU wide receiver, or it might even be him and Mordecai in the same lineup. So a lot of different ways to build with him.
The whole game, yeah. Then we have Max Johnson at Mississippi State for the LSU team. He's been surprisingly good. He won't give you much on the ground, but he has thrown for a lot of touchdowns already this season, 11 in 3 games. So certainly getting it done through the air, but 8,300. Are you interested in Max Johnson?
I don't know. I keep going back and forth on him because I think that game is going to be a high scoring game. And I think he probably crests 300 yards. But all the players that I like more than him have some sort of rushing upside, or I think a higher passing ceiling. And so I am okay with Max Johnson because I don't think he's super pricey. And he would be, like Malik Cunningham, one of the plays that aren't a SMU or TCU quarterback at the high end. So he's fine. And I think that's the same thing's true of Will Rogers as well. I think they're both 300. They're not locked in, but pretty close to locked in for 300 yards. What the upside looks like beyond that, in a slate where there's a lot of really good quarterbacks, I'm not positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good take for what to do with that LSU and Mississippi State game. Okay, so now we got to talk about JT Daniels. I personally don't really have interest in him at Vandy. Georgia just wants to run the ball. I mean, I think if they're pressed, they may pass a decent amount. I thought they were going to be more interested in passing this year, but it seems like they still really aren't, and their defense allows them not to need to. So any interest there? And then I mean, maybe a $1 GPP on DJU if they get right, but I'm not going to put much on it.
Yeah, I won't play JT Daniels. He just doesn't have the upside. They're 34-point favorites this week against Vanderbilt, so I don't really see his path to like a 300-yard 3-game. Like, I don't know. I just don't see it. And DJU is only interesting insofar, like you said, GPP, like one-off tournament play, because if he hits this week, he will probably be in the winning lineup of a GPP.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be like under 5% rostered. Yeah, I mean, no one's going to play him.
Yeah, Clemson's offense has really struggled, and I think there's two parts of that. One is the offensive line, brutal, but DJU has not looked good. He's really lacking confidence. He's just not the same player he was when we saw him last year. So until I see a get right game from him, I'm probably off of him in DFS.
Yeah, I think so. But again, I mean, if you throw a small little GPP on him every single week until it happens, I mean, he's probably going to have a 350, 4-touchdown game at some point. He just seems that good, but I wouldn't invest heavily. That's for sure. And we got to talk about Boise State at Utah State. Said in the opening piece, this is an interesting game, I think, for fantasy. Hank Bachmeier's been pretty decent. He's got a big arm, but he's not great for fantasy. The yards really aren't there. He hasn't hit 300 yards yet, I don't think. So I'm really not interested there at 7,300. But I think you're interested in the opposing quarterback in that game.
I actually like Bachmeier, I think, because it's the same idea with TCU, SMU, right? Like, this might be a game to stack at like a cheaper cost and then pay up elsewhere. Right.
That's true.
Boise State had a bad loss last week, and I don't think Boise State as a team is as good as people think they are. I think there's a misconception about how good they really are as a team, which is a different question. But they do have the third highest implied team total on the slate, highest game total on the slate, tied highest. But Utah State's defense is so bad. They allowed 45 points to Air Force and then 24 points to an FCS team in North Dakota. I think this game at the total is really interesting to invest in. They're allowing 8.25 yards per pass attempt, so I like Bachmeier. But I do really like the Utah State quarterback, Logan Bonner.
Bargain bin! And he is real bargain bin, folks.
Yeah, so anytime there's a quarterback that we're playing under 6K, it's like, you want to like pump the brakes a little bit, but he is splitting time with Andrew Peasley a little bit because Peasley's a little bit more dynamic on the ground. But in this matchup, I think it's going to be hard pressed to find a better points per dollar play than Bonner at the quarterback position. So they're 9-point dogs, so they're going to be passing probably to keep up. He's averaging 21.38 DraftKings points per contest.
Even splitting some time.
So Boise State's defense is brutal against the pass. They're 106 in yards per pass attempt, and they're 109th in EPA per pass attempt. So their defense has been bad against the pass. I like Bonner a lot this week. I think, he got injured at the end of the last game, which led to Peasley having a little bit more reps at the end, and he did keep them in against Air Force, and they won, and it was a pretty gutsy performance. But if Bonner is healthy, and Bonner's starting, and Bonner's getting 85 to 90% of the let's say snaps at quarterback, 5,600 is really hard to pass up, and it's tied for the highest total on the slate. Like, it's really, really hard to ignore Bonner at 5,600 this week.
Yeah, 100% here. This is a unique opportunity because of his time splitting ways. And it's just so cheap. I mean, this is reserved for a guy like Brendan Lewis is 5,600, who, can't even throw for 100. against anybody and barely rushes for more than 40 yards. That's the kind of guy you get for 5,600. I mean, Bonner's already gone over 300 yards, I believe, twice this season. So he is putting up numbers. There is that weirdness about the splitting time, which is maybe why he's so cheap, but it's really hard to pass him up this week. And then there's another quarterback in the SEC that you kind of like. Take it away with Connor Bazelak for Missouri at Boston College. Are you interested in playing him this week?
So I am. So they're 3-point favorites, and I think it's an interesting game to bet Boston on the money line. I'm not quite sure that Missouri is that much better than them.
Winning.
But they're throwing at 56.1% of plays, one of the highest rates in the country. Bazelak has 299 and 3 average per 3 games. Boston College's pass defense has been good, but they played Colgate, UMass, and Temple. So how good has it actually been? They're limiting explosive plays.
Winning.
Again, how good has it been? They're extremely efficient in limiting explosive plays. So I like Bazelak.
I think it's an interesting play, and he's pretty cheap. He's 6,800. Anytime you get under 7 for a starting quarterback who has 3 touchdown upside, which I think he does, that's interesting for sure. Okay, moving on to running backs. The poster guy for our opener is Bijan. He's the most expensive guy in the slate. Texas playing at home against Texas Tech, who has kind of a decent run defense, but Bijan's probably matchup proof. The question is he going to get 25 touches for that price? 7,200, which frankly isn't that much for the most expensive running back on a given slate. So all the running backs are a little bit cheaper this week.
Yeah, I expect him to actually have like a 20 plus opportunities. I think he's averaging 19, and they've played a couple games where they've been down. So I think, they're 9-point favorites this week. I think that he probably gets a heavy dose of action. Texas Tech's defense is pretty good. I mean, it's okay. They're outside the top 40 in defensive EPA per rush attempt. So I do think that there's a chance for Bijan to be involved there. And he's obviously involved in the passing game too. He's one of the country's better pass catching running backs. So I'm not really particularly worried about Bijan. I think at 7,100, he's a fine play this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, he is the most expensive back on the slate, but sometimes we see $9,000, $9,500 running backs. And so he's not even close to that. So I think relatively speaking, it's kind of a value. Breece Hall, priced down at only $7K. He was one of those $9,000 backs not that long ago. He's been a bit disappointing in the production standpoint this year, and going to Baylor in a game that I think might go under. Now, even in a game that goes under the point total of 48, Hall can absolutely still have 102 and, probably pay off his $7K salary. Do you think you're going to be playing any Breece Hall? I mean, he's just the most locked and loaded for 25 opportunities in any given game. So you're definitely getting volume.
Yeah. So he's averaging 23 opportunities thus far, and they're a favorite. So I think that 25, I think you're totally right about that. So he's not a priority target for me just because Baylor's defense is they're top 60 in rushing, and that's okay. But, Iowa State's offensive line has really not been that impressive this year. So he is viable is my thought, but not a priority. I think that there are cheaper backs with similar upside. But again, it's Breece Hall. He could go for 150 and 3, and we're just laughing about how he was only 7K.
Absolutely. Okay, interesting name here as the third most expensive running back. I think a lot of people might, be like, who is this guy? Tyler Beatty from Missouri. He's had quite a season actually already. 25 carries in his first game against Central Michigan, 14 carries against Kentucky. However, 10 receptions against Kentucky. He's got 15 receptions in the first 3 games. He's looking like Missouri's workhorse and comes in at 6,900 in a game that should be close. I don't think BC is going to run away with it, but BC, generally speaking, it's kind of like a slow slog, those games, especially up in Boston College. So that's an interesting price point. Where do you land on Beatty?
Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head. He's averaging 23.3 opportunities per game thus far. Boston College's rush defense is ranked 13th in defensive EPA per rush attempt. Again, who have they played to make that a scary number thus far? I'm not super worried about it, but I think a lot of his value comes in the passing game. I just think he's going to be so heavily involved in what should be a close and high scoring game with an over under of 59 points. So I like Beatty because he does have 10 reception upside on the week, and I don't think any other back on the slate does.
Yeah, his role in the passing game makes him incredibly intriguing, actually, and a little bit of a savings off Bijan Robinson. But if you can find $300, maybe you just go Bijan is the only thing there. You got two Michigan players coming in next. Corum's been great. Haskins been kind of whatever, kind of a banging type running back. His average per carry is pretty good, but he doesn't get any receptions at all, whereas Corum does. Corum has the explosion. But again, until proven otherwise, I don't really want Michigan players. I mean, they split time with these guys. I'm not interested in either one, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's so hard to fade Corum after 3 straight 100-yard games. Like it really, really is. But I think this is the week to do so because I think he's going to be popular. I don't think Rutgers is a bad defense in terms of defensive line yards, top 50 in the country. They have an impressive defensive line. I think there are better options than Corum this week because I don't think Corum's going to catch any passes. I think he's going to split some time with Hassan Haskins if we think that the spread is how the game plays out, which is like about 20 points. I like him fine. I'm probably going to play him in a few lineups, but not my favorite target on the slate.
All right, in the pinball game that could be SMU at TCU, Ulysses Bentley has been, I think, a slight disappointment this year. 2 games under 75 yards rushing. He hasn't been catching the ball the way that, maybe we thought he would, only 2 catches per game. The price seems a little excessive, although it is a game that could go a little wild, but, only 6 total catches on 3 games. I thought he'd be more involved there.
Yeah, I'm not on Ulysses Bentley. I thought he was going to be like a G5 Deuce Vaughn.
Yeah.
And he's more like a Dollar General Deuce Vaughn.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was going to be like heavily involved, and he's kind of a satellite piece for them. He's not a workhorse, and I thought he would maybe be a workhorse this year.
Yeah, but I like the other running back in that game, Zach Evans. I think that he's really interesting. 6,200. He had a bad game in the series opener. He was suspended by the team for 2 series, and then they were up by so much they weren't going to use him. Rip Cal's defense.
Oh,
I think he's the workhorse there. I mean, he had 22 carries, and no other running back had 4. They have the second highest implied team total on the slate. They're heavy favorites. I think the way to play this game from a lineup building perspective is Evans, and then on the other side, a SMU stack with Mordecai and your preferred wide receiver or 2. And so I think Evans is a great play at his price.
I love that. I mean, it's hard to fade him if he's going to really get 20 plus carries because he should be their workhorse. And like you said, the week 1 was a little bit bizarre, but he even got in the end zone in week 1 later in the game after kind of sitting out for the first half. And then the very obvious, bell cow every down guy, which Texas Christian has not actually done that for a few years. They've had this committee situation for a few years now where 3, even 4 running backs will get work. And he just dominated against Cal in a close game. So it was like not even a blowout or anything. I mean, they just fed him and he went absolutely bonkers, 190 yards. If he's going to be the workhorse, I mean, it's hard to fade him at 6,200 here. Definitely going to have good exposure to Zach Evans because he's also an explosive guy. I mean, he can take it 75 yards, which you love to see any running back who can go the distance in one play. Isaiah Spiller seems really priced down at only 5,900. I mean, he's been pretty good. He's gotten to the bonus in 2 out of 3 games. The only game he didn't was Colorado, which was just an absolutely bizarre game. I mean, 10-7 at Colorado. Haynes King got hurt. Just a weird game. But otherwise has been sensational, but it's been against Kent State and New Mexico. So not really sure what to think about Bryce or Isaiah Spiller, but 1,500 is cheap. I mean, he was on par with Breece Hall 2 weeks ago, and now he's way less than Breece Hall.
Yeah. So the only thing that worries me is that matchup, right? They shut down Bijan early in the year, but I think Texas, that's an issue with Texas's line. Like I'm not that impressed by Arkansas. I think it was more Texas question in that game. Isaiah Spiller also has pass catching upside. So I think he's more than in play this week if you want to pay down at running back. But I do think there's an inherent risk that they just don't have much going on the ground, and maybe they go to Calzada, my favorite quarterback in the country.
And we have to touch on Will Shipley, who just came out of last week with 21 carries and 2 receptions. So he had 23 touches and scored 2 touchdowns against Georgia Tech. So, a kind of a cupcake Georgia Tech matchup. However, it was still an ACC contest, and he was pretty much the feature at 23 touches. Is Will Shipley going to keep getting 20 touches? We know he has the talent, but if this is a thing, then it's going to be hard to fade Will Shipley at this price again.
Well, I'm just not really.
I don't think I'm hit the transfer portal.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I don't think I'm playing a single player in this game extensively, at least. Shipley is priced fine, but North Carolina State's their defense is good. They're only allowing 2.8 yards per carry, and they're ranked 36 in defensive EPA per rush attempt. So it's not like they're a bad team, especially defensively. They've been very good defensively. So I'm not rushing out to play Will Shipley. I think Clemson is probably going to continue their offensive struggles this week.
Okay, I'm going to let you talk about a dude, Pat Garwo, for Boston College. Tell me why you like this guy, because I don't know really anything about him.
Yeah, so I actually texted you about him earlier this week because I was shocked when I was previewing the slate, and so I don't really know much about Pat Garwo either. I know he's 5,200 and he plays on a Missouri team that ranks 125th in rushing yards per game, 127th in rushing yards per rush attempt, and 126th in defensive EPA per rushing attempt. Looking only at running back production over their first 3 games, they allowed 241 yards to Central Michigan, 245 yards to Kentucky, and 294 rushing yards to Southeast Missouri State.
Woo!
Garwo at 5,200 in a close matchup against one of the nation's worst rushing defenses. Extremely interesting at 5,200. I'm just saying, he's priced down. You could do a lot worse than facing the worst rushing defense on the slate by a long shot.
Absolutely. But you know who's priced down even more? One of your guys, another one you texted me about it earlier this week. Is he the starter for Texas Tech? Taj Brooks comes in almost at 4,000. He's 4,100, so just a little bit over.
Yeah, so he started, and he's been extremely impressive thus far. Averaging he has 284 yards in 3 games, 8.1 yards per carry. They are 9-point dogs, which is a little bit worrisome. But Texas's defense has not been particularly impressive on the ground this year, and I think that's the way that they can probably attack them this week. So I don't know if this is a Tyler Shuck week necessarily. I think this is a week where we get Taj Brooks involved. He only has 12 touches per game thus far, but I'm not really concerned about that. I think that they haven't had to use him to the point where he has to get more than those really 12 touches to win the game. I like him this week. I think he's a great matchup, and I think that's the way they're going to be able to keep the game close versus Texas. Slow it down, run the ball, just keep the Texas offense on the field because they have questions in the secondary on defense. I like Taj Brooks a lot this week. I think that he's a great value at 4,100.
Right, and my apologies to Taj and the Brooks family. I spelled his name wrong on here. It should be Tahj. So apologies to everybody there. But yeah, I mean, 4,100, very hard to disagree with that. He has scored 2 times in 2 games. So I think touchdown equity is going to be there. Doesn't catch a lot of passes, at least not yet this year. But certainly at 4,100 allows you to do a lot of other things, and probably the cheapest running back that I'm going to feel comfortable rostering. So I like that call. And then the other guy in this general vicinity that I want to highlight, because I think you're going to catch a game of Corey Kiner that, maybe wins a GPP type situation one of these weeks. I think he's rising on the depth chart at LSU. He had 11 carries in week 2 against McNeese State. And I think everybody chalked it up to, oh, well, it's McNeese State. But then he had 12 carries last week against Central Michigan. He's looked like the best back in the LSU backfield, despite being a true freshman. And, he's only coming in at 4,900. I think you're going to see 100 yards and 1 or 2 touchdowns one of these weeks, because he's going to kind of come out of nowhere and be the full-blown starter and get 20 opportunities or 25 opportunities. And you may not get notice. So kind of like DJU, you may want to do some GPPs and keep rolling out Kiner, because he's going to have a breakout game at sub 5%, rosters, and you're going to want to be interested in that.
Yeah, no, you like Kiner more than I do. I'm a little bit worried about the matchup, and I think it's mostly a game back and forth. But under 5K for a starting running back in a high scoring matchup, I mean, the recipe is there for success.
Yeah, I just think that it's a guy that, I'll probably mention him every week unless his price gets a lot higher, because you're going to catch a wave one of these weeks, and you just want to be there when it happens. All right, receivers, did you have any other running backs you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I'll talk quickly about Kendall Milton. He's 3,500. He did lead Georgia in rush attempts last week. James Cook is 2,500 more expensive than him just because he lucked into 2 receiving touchdowns. I don't think that happens again this week. Vandy's allowing 6.1 yards per carry on the ground. They have one of the worst defenses or rush defenses in the country. I think this is a game where Kendall Milton could 3-4x 3,500, and you're looking pretty good if you pay down for him.
Yeah, and he, it wouldn't shock me if he went 15 for 100 and 2 touchdowns, just because it's Vandy. I mean, literally anything can happen when you play Vandy. The other guy, real quick, Jalen Mitchell is kind of the workhorse for Louisville. FSU's run defense is kind of decent, but Mitchell's getting close to 20 opportunities per game. I think he's definitely their starting running back and will get goal line equity there. And he's only 5,100 in a game that should be back and forth and pretty loose with the scoring. So I think he's one to consider as well at price point. So you have some pretty nice options in that 5K and the 4K range. So I don't think running back is a position where we really want to spend up too much this week. Quarterback is looking like you probably want to spend at least one of the top quarterbacks. And then we get to wide receivers with Quentin Johnston coming in as the most expensive receiver. You've already mentioned him in stacking with Dugan. He is by far, I think, the TCU alpha and, going to get any touchdowns. The problem is the TCU passing game just is not very heavy volume. So despite being the alpha, do you want Quentin Johnston this week?
So I do in runbacks where I'm playing Mordecai, and then if I'm stacking Dugan with somebody, that's the scenarios where I'll play Johnston. And I think that's fine, right? SMU's pass defense is 95th in defensive EPA per attempt, 120th in passing yards per game attempt. Their defense is really, really bad. Johnston is averaging 8 targets per game, 30% target share on almost 30% target share on the season. He's averaging 17.35 fantasy points, but I was running some numbers today, and his unrealized fantasy points, which is a combination of like air yards and then receptions and targets, and it's a it's a formula that we've been working on kind of behind the scenes here. He's leaving 14.5 points on the table each week. So I think at some point, he is someone who can really outperform expectations because each week he's having unrealized fantasy points, unrealized air yards, because he's such a dynamic downfield threat. So I am okay playing him this week, even at the priced up cost.
Yeah, I love that unrealized fantasy points y'all have been working on in the lab. That is some fantastic stuff there. Just a little shout out our parent website, campus2canton.com, and we will be putting out content that maybe highlights that. We're still, tooling around with it, but become a member today for the low price of $2.99 per month and get all the things that we're working on, including unrealized air yard or unrealized fantasy points, which is a little bit more in depth than unrealized air yards, which is we know is pretty common. Devin Tompkins has simply been one of the best receivers in the country this year for Utah State. He is the second most expensive receiver on the slate. All he's done is go 8 for 94, 8 for 172, 9 for 188, and put it in the end zone each week. I have no argument against him. It's just a matter, can you fit Devin Tompkins this week?
Yeah, he's the guy to stack with Bonner. I actually think the way to play that game, and this is, I think we're having more strategy talk this week because there are a lot of cheaper options that you can play with more expensive options. And so there's a lot of flexibility in the slate because there's really a lot of good options. It's a very solid slate, I think. So with Tompkins, I think you play Bonner with him, and I think maybe you target a secondary Utah State wide receiver as well. So he's averaging 12 targets per game, 31.9 fantasy points per game. I mean, he's just ridiculous. They're 9-point underdogs. They're just going to keep throwing. I have zero issue plugging him in this week.
Yeah.
But he will be popular.
He will be.
For sure.
Let's just go through all the Utah State receivers at the same time. So then you have Bowling, who is a transfer, followed the quarterback Logan Bonner over from Arkansas State and the coach from Arkansas State. So he's kind of that glue guy in the locker room. And honestly, I played him a little bit in week 1 and he went 1 for 10. I don't know if he was injured. I don't know what the deal was, but since then, 6 for 118, 9 for 136, and 2 last week against Air Force. I mean, they are just blowing up the scoreboard. Obviously, Tompkins is doing what he's doing, but Bowling has really come on. He's priced down at $6,900. I mean, any interest there? You got to have some interest, but again, it's just can you fit all these prices? And then you have Justin McGriff, our final bargain bin for the week, getting a piece of this passing game. He's probably they're consistently their third receiver. He's a huge X receiver on the outside. Now, this offense does love the slot. So, the targets don't go his way as much, but he's 6'3", 4, 5, something like that, 210 pounds, big dude. You can see him in this picture here, mossing a Boise State player from last year, but he's only 3,700, getting a piece of this passing game in a game that should be back and forth, a lot of passing, kind of like it.
Oh, I love Justin McGriff this week. He might be one of my favorite values. He is out targeting Brandon Bowling, 7.3 to 6.7 targets per game. And he's running 14 more routes per game. He's just always in on 2 wide receiver sets. I think he's one of those guys that has a lot of he's just someone who can have more production coming his way, I think. So he, per game so far this year, he has 7.8 unrealized fantasy points. Again, I really like him. 3,000 cheaper than Brandon Bowling. More targets, more routes. I think McGriff is at under 4K is a solid value this week.
That is a good word, man. I love those numbers you're bringing to the table here. 7 unrealized fantasy points per game for Justin McGriff. Give me those 7 on top of, let's even just say a baseline of 5 or 6. That's 13, 14 fantasy points at 3,700. Sign me up all day for that savings in a game that, the whole game script lines up for this to be the week he realizes those fantasy points, I think. Next in line, biggest name going back up to the top of the list, but probably one of the biggest names in fantasy or college receivers is Kayshon Boutte for LSU. 7,700. What is there to say? He's a total stud, getting 30% of their passing equity. I mean, go for it. I mean, if you can fit it, you don't have. I mean, I think we've talked about other guys who are truly just as awesome in games that are going to be high scoring. You can't fit all of these guys, even if you stack 4. You're going to have to leave some of these receivers on the table, and it's kind of just going to be lucky at that point, I think.
Yeah. No,
I mean, you want Tompkins, you want Boutte,
right.
you want Johnston, you want other guys we're going to talk about. I mean, there's 5 or 6 receivers I want. You can't play them all at one time.
So I think Boutte is my favorite above 7,500.
Oh, okay.
So he's really interesting because he's obviously the alpha there. LSU has the 8th highest pass rate in the country. I think they're going over 300 yards this week. They leave a lot to be desired as a defense, Mississippi State. I really like Kayshon Boutte, and the number that I'm throwing out a lot, the unrealized fantasy points, 10.2 per game.
And
on top of the
a ton, yeah.
On top of the 27, he's already scoring.
Yeah.
Like I think he's my favorite above 7,500 because I don't think you have to play Quentin Johnston, and I think I like some of the other Utah State options.
Yeah, I know. Looking at his game log, he's failed to go. He scored touchdowns, but he's failed to go over 100 yards back-to-back weeks. People maybe played him and got burned, but I have no problem running him back. He's a superior talent. He's the best player on the field.
He's probably the best wide receiver in the country, and he has 10 touchdowns in his last 6 games. So you're probably getting to the end zone with him.
Yeah, and it's if he's going to even be a slight discount in terms of rostership because he's burned people 2 weeks in a row against weak matchups. But, sometimes these weak matchups, the game just goes funky. But this will be a game. It's an SEC game. They're not going to play around. They're going to go to their alpha, just like they did against LSU or UCLA when he went 9 for 150 and a touchdown. So, I love Boutte. I agree with you. I think he might be the best pay-up receiver. But, man, we got Khalil Shakir coming in at 7,400, and this is a dude that should be top 3, top 2, top most expensive receiver on any given slate because we talk about alphas. He's like the most alpha-ish receiver in college football, if I may be so bold. Last year, accounting for over 40% of his team's receiving production. There's not a lot of guys that do that. Came back for his senior season, and he's doing it again. Just if they're going to be passing the ball, it's going to go to Shakir, and that is a nice thing to bank on, and you don't even have to pay up too much. Yeah,
some might call him the smash of the slate, if I do say so myself.
He is the smash of the slate. At 7,400, how could I forget? Yes. And I obviously told him, I said, I took so glowingly about him because he's smashed the friggin' slate. You have anything to add?
No, I think you hit it all. They get one of the highest scoring games of the week, and he has 29% target share on a pass-heavy offense. I think he's a good option to stack with Bachmeier, or run back with Bonner if you want to play it that way.
Oh, yeah, I have no problem with just rolling Shakir without Bachmeier. No problem stacking him either. So, all right, smash the slate. Khalil Shakir, I love that guy. When he's on a slate, I feel so that I just have to play him because there's not a lot of guys who get 40% of their team's receiving, production. And so it's just if they're going to be throwing, it's going to go to him. And you love to see that. I think from there, it gets into like a weird, I don't love some of these plays here. I'll let you talk about some different SMU receivers because I know you like quite a bit of them. I want to touch on Makai Polk for Mississippi State. This guy I think he's just priced too low. He's 6,200. And in 2 of the 3 games this year, he has gone for over 10 receptions, not targets, receptions. And the one game he didn't, he was 4 for 33 against, like we've talked about, a pretty decent NC State defense. It's just for 6,200, if you get a guy who's going to flirt with, 7+ receptions, you kind of love that. And I think Polk has become the go-to guy. It's a little surprising. We all thought it was going to be Wally, but, they brought in Polk for a reason and they're using him. He was a transfer from Cal.
Love Polk, averaging 10.7 targets on the season per game. So definitely awesome player.
Take us through the Mustang receivers. I know you have a soft spot for at least one of them.
Yeah, so I like Danny Gray. He's the priciest of them, 7,100. He's definitely been the alpha of the group. They're running a play every 21.9 seconds, 12th in the country. So they're really, really fast, throwing over 38 times per game. Again, this is just an offense that you really want to invest in. He has 7.7 targets. 7,100 is a little bit pricey when you consider that Grant Calcaterra, 4,900. He's the tight end in this offense, but through 3 weeks, he has 6 targets per game, averaging 17.4 DraftKings points. He's 1,400 cheaper than Rashee Rice and 2,200 cheaper than Danny Gray. And they're all kind of scoring similarly in a very fast-paced offense. I like Calcaterra as well, but I think my favorite option from this offense is Reggie Roberson. So Roberson has been, he's been the alpha there for quite a few years. He's actually like coming to the year, he was a Debbie favorite as well, but he is like a really dynamic wide receiver, and he's actually probably in terms of points per dollar the best receiving option on the slate. So he's a historically productive wide receiver, 1,800 cheaper than Rashee Rice. He's out targeting Rice 5.7 to 4.0 targets per game. Rice just happened to score 2 touchdowns last week, so I think he got priced up because of it. I really like Roberson. I think at 4,500 on the slate's highest total, there's a lot to like, and he had 9 targets last week. We know he's going to be involved. Huge fan of him and really the entire SMU offense, but I think he's a cheap way to get a lot of value in a extremely high scoring game.
Really, really like that. Again, the targets, that's really good to know for Roberson. And he's a senior. He's been there for a long time. I think they're going to get him going. He's not going to be forgotten in that offense for sure. And so coming in at the cheapest option, I really like that as well. Man, you were texting us in the Slack today about Xavier Worthy's unrealized fantasy points. I think he's going to be pretty chalky. He scored a touchdown last week and had 7 receptions for 88 yards against Rice, but he could be coming on as the main option in that Texas passing game and going up against Texas Tech. He's only 4,700 and according to you has a higher ceiling than he's even shown.
Yeah, so I think he's interesting. I just think my hesitation is that Texas Tech's defensive EPA per pass attempt is top 10 in the country. So I'm not super in on Worthy, and I'm not sure how good Casey Thompson is either. So I think he's going to be a smart chalk fade this week. Yeah, I love his upside. I love his upside as a player long term. I think he's going to avoid this week because I think he's going to come in super cheap and not pay off.
Yeah, he's gonna come in very chalky. Anybody else down? We already talked, Justin McGriff. He's under 4K. Is there anybody else who's like a big, bargain that you might like, or any other names you wanna mention before we wrap up?
So I'll add 2. The first is Kiki Chisholm, the wide receiver at Missouri. He's averaging 7.6 targets per game. They're as an offense, they have over 40 pass attempts per game. He is by far the wide receiver 1 there. Him and Beatty are both garnering like almost 7 targets. Their pass rates 13th in the country. They average over 330 yards. Chisholm is really, really involved in that offense. And I was surprised when I was pulling his numbers today. He at least 7.5 unrealized fantasy points on the table per game as well. And he's already averaging 9.13. This is a game that could potentially hit the over, and it's already at 59 points. I like Chisholm this week, and I think that he's going to be a favorite target of Bazelak. So I think he's a nice stacking option at 5,400. And then the other one I'll mention is two TCU wide receivers to run back against SMU, Darius Davis and Savion Williams. Davis operates as wide receiver 2 in terms of targets, but Savion Williams is actually running more routes, and he's only 3,300 compared to Davis' 3,900. So I think he's really, really interesting. Despite only averaging 2 targets per game, he's definitely operating as a wide receiver 2 in terms of routes run. So I think Savion Williams is a really interesting way to get different. I think Darius Davis is too. 3,900. I think either of those guys in that matchup is a really interesting stacking option, or run back with Mordecai plus SMU wide receiver.
And if they go off, there's no way those guys are going to be popular. We're talking under 5%, under 3% rostered. So very smart if that happens, if they go off. Well, that brings us to the end here. Chris, good luck out there in week 4. And, I'm excited. We've been doing pretty well. Shout out to the tailgate on Saturday morning. We're going to do a live show. Chris is on from, I think, 10 to noon. I come on at 11, and we will talk any kind of updates, changes. Guys, we're more on and more off, depending on new information that we get throughout the week. So there's definitely changes. You're going to want to tune in for that all the way up to kickoff, with injury information as it comes in as well, and live changes as we go through that. So once again, Chris, love to do this with you. Thanks for joining me. And, we'll see you out there in the Twitter streets. I'm at Alfred JF. He's at Chris Moxley 19. Hit us up out there, and definitely check us out on